Welcome to the F Word, where we talk about everything finance. And today we're going to talk about trust, not the trust that we have in one another.
That's not a lot.
Because we don't trust Franco. He's still not here. He's still on holiday somewhere in Cape Town. But we want to talk about how relevant is a trust these days. PJ, I know in the old days, everyone seemed to have had a trust or multiples of trusts. But is it still worth it to put your assets into a trust?
Like all the answer, it depends. But I think from the olden days, really everyone had a trust. There was companies that made a lot of money selling not one trust, but like 3 trusts. You need a family trust, and you need a business trust, and you need business 2 trusts. We had one client that's at 7 trusts, and we recommended that they only keep 2. But he was like a big businessman. But still, they said because
even
of family.
even he didn't even know what's happening in these various trusts. You can see there was someone just selling him trusts, and it looks very fancy, it looks very complicated, but
it's too complicated.
It's too complicated, perhaps.
And that's exactly the thing, and we see it a lot in investments as well. If it's too complicated, you don't keep with it, or a diet program or anything. It needs to keep it simple, and there's definitely pros and cons to a trust. I think the cons, everyone's talking about the cons now. It's expensive because there is a running cost of a trust.
And a setup fee.
A setup fee, let's call it, I won't put numbers on that. But there's a running cost on that as well. And if you've really got a good trustee, they also should ask a fee, because a lot of people just had trustees and they didn't use it for the right reasons. And now with the grey listing and everything, the compliance and the FICA due diligence. So if you've got a company and you've got a trust as the shareholder, you've got a FICA due diligence, all the trust and all the they want to get to the warm body, so they FICA all the trustees as well. So you can see this is a lot of compliance that you have to go through now to have this trust. So I agree, for most people now, it doesn't make sense to have a trust. But there's other things that the trust can do that companies can't do, and that is for estate planning. So even if you have a company and you say that's where all my company shares is, when you die and you're 100% shareholder, that shares of that company is going to your estate. So while if it wasn't a trust, that can continue. So you can understand, for a farmer that's got a farm, he will be stupid if he hadn't put it in a trust. So, and now let's say the farmer, he dies and it goes to his son. And if it was in his own name, now he's got to pay estate duty, not only estate duty, capital gains on that farm. And now the son have it in his own name. If the son dies and goes to the grandson, now again there's estate duty and capital gains. So the only thing that makes sense, so you can't say there's not a place for trust anymore. So in this circumstance, you can definitely see there's a place for trust.
For multiple generations, for contingency planning, for legacy planning, to make sure that asset's not in your own name, because otherwise it will die with you, basically. Now it will just continue as normal because it's in a trust.
Yes, definitely. And let's say a family company as well. The shares of that company will also make sense. And it makes sometimes a lot more sense to move a tree when it's small. So when the cost is still small, because now you've got a massive company, few million rand, and now you want to move it. And then we see with a lot of clients, well, it's too expensive to move it now. Expensive in the form of tax, because you have to pay capital gains.
So PJ, if we look at something like estate duty, so for an individual, when does it then become sort of, you've got enough assets now where it actually makes sense that you are going to pay too much estate duty? Obviously, you've got the 3A abatement. If it goes over that, is that sort of where you start looking at maybe starting a trust, or does it depend on the situation? Does it depend on if there's a business that needs to be run? Does it depend on if there's beneficiaries that needs to run the business? What would you start looking at there?
Yeah. So I think definitely for multi-generational assets. So it's difficult to say your company is going to be a success, but when you see it gets quite big, then it makes sense to have it in trust and take the pain. Then somewhere you've got to take the pain before it's too late, or otherwise people just wait till they die and put it in their will to then go to trust. That makes sense as well. But let's say you have that 3A rebate, you get 3.5 million for one person, 3.5 million for the spouse. So that's 7 million. So under 7 million, it doesn't make sense. And again, money like in a retirement annuity, that gets excluded. So that's even over and above. So if your assets is, I know 7 million is not for some people a lot anymore, but that's the first time you start looking at it, like a multi-generational assets, or when your estate gets quite big, then you can start looking at the trust.
And what would be the reason to do investments, so discretionary investments in a trust rather than in your own name?
Yeah, again, that's only for your estate duty. So a lot of people put their primary homes in the trust as well. That was an olden days. A lot of people it doesn't make sense because you get 2 million capital gains exclusion in your own name, what you don't get in a trust. So there's some, again, negatives to a trust as well. So again, if you have got the best house in the village, then maybe you should put it in a trust. If you believe that this is a once-in-a-lifetime house, but most of your children say, I won't live there, I'm going to buy my own house. So again, that depends. I think someone in Stellenbosch that buys a nice house and he wants to keep it in the family, definitely makes sense. Or a holiday home, it makes sense to buy in a trust. But yeah, the most difficult question actually is now, before, if you decide to go a trust, the most difficult question is how to get money into the trust.
That's what I want to know. So now I want to buy the business or the property from the trust. Where does the trust get his money from? And how does that process work? Getting money into the trust,
and that's why there's a lot of negative news as well about the trust, because SARS wanted to take away the conduit principle that it can't be taxed in minors' hands. But at this stage, you can do it. So there is some tax planning benefits, but that's not the reason why I do it. The tax tail shouldn't wave the dog, they say. So that's not the reason why I did. But because now, but I said, okay, what most people did, they gave them 1 million rand a few years ago, put it in a trust, they buy the share portfolio, and now they keep the loan 1 million rand, and that share portfolio grows in the trust to 3 million rand. Great. SARS loses out on that estate duty. But SARS is actually quite smart. They said, okay, no, that 1 million rand should have interest.
It's not interest-free anymore.
So it's not interest-free. So that's the most difficult thing, is to get money into the trust. You can only donate 100,000 rand a year. So normally if you and your spouse, 200,000 rand. So that's for most people, younger people that's in the high net worth can start with a 200,000 rand, put it into that. But you can't do, you can, a 3 million loan, but then it's better to donate it. Pay the 20% donation tax if that's what you want to do. But that's why it's very expensive. So most people don't do that, but then you've got a problem. So that's why it's easier to move the like shares in a company while it's still small. Because in the beginning, a share of a company is only 100 rand, so you can put it into a trust. So that's where that planning comes into.
And I think also maybe from the olden days, it was used just as another person, like most people use it as a second person for themselves, or a vehicle for themselves, a sham trust. You must remember, putting things into a trust, you give up authority over that trust, because now the trustees, you give ownership, now the trustees manage that for the beneficiaries. It's not just you as the person who started the trust, or the businessman or the client running the trust as you see fit. And the independent trustee, how important is that these days? Because I think previously, or old days, there wasn't really an independent trustee. It was a friend of yours, and you do as I say.
Yeah, and that's why it's not in the law, but there's court cases that says the importance of independent trustee. And that independent trustee, now it was always the sister or the brother, should be like a professional person and actually say, is this benefit for all the beneficiaries? Otherwise, he can get sued, basically, and says, so no, that's very important. So that's one of the cons. And if you put an asset into the trust, you should know this is not under your control anymore. It's under control of the trustees. And some people don't want to do that. Maybe it's sometimes better to do that. Another positive then of a trust is it's protected against creditors because it's not in your name anymore. So a lot of people, when they see they're going to divorce, they try to put all their assets in there. But the divorce attorneys is more clever than that as well. So they say, okay, this was part of the estate. So that, again, there's not a lot of loopholes. So again, it's all about structure follows strategy. So what's a strategy that you have of where you want, again, for a farm, property, it makes sense, or a family business, it makes sense. But if you are a consulting company and it's going to die with you, does it make sense to put all that again? Or if you have a lot of investment, so that's why I said it depends on that.
And without getting too technical, just a final question from me. Without getting too technical, you know, a trust with a type of structure where there's a holding company inside of the trust and there's companies underneath owning shares in each other. What's the reason, or the, how can I say, the tax planning involved with a structure like that? Why would you do it like that?
Yeah, so most people do that. They actually brought in a holding company because of a trust. It's not very taxed, but if the taxes get taxed at 45%. Like I said, you can let it follow through to all the beneficiaries. But again, then it goes into their state, what's the point of the trust if you're going to do that? So most people's got the trust and then a holding company, and below that, holding company. Again, it's a FICA nightmare, but if the structure, again, if there's enough money, it makes sense to do that. So there's mostly a holding company that's got the money and then they invest in like that. So it makes sense, again, depending on the strategy and what they want to do. So if you have one property, maybe it makes sense to keep it in your own and your spouse's name. But if you want to build a property empire, maybe it makes sense to have a trust and a company and the company below that.
Yeah, so as always, thank you, PJ, Ruvan. It's not as easy as just saying a trust is good or bad. It depends on your situation. So it can be definitely worth it. It can be beneficial for your portfolio, but don't use it for the wrong reasons, I would actually say.
Yeah, and just a final point of it, I've got friends, then their fathers, the structure wasn't correct. Now I say, well, this is the best time to structure it now. Let their will, all the assets go to a trust in your name. That's only the best time to do that, because all the estate duty and taxes are already going to be paid. If it's going to go to the children, structure it correctly at will. So again, estate planning, very important.
Thank you. Thank you, PJ, Ruvan. Let us know if you have any questions regarding this topic, and we look forward to seeing you next week.